A very good morning, everyone. Okay, it's a good time to start. It's now 11:05. Others will join us in the course of our conversation. Good morning and compliments of the season. In continuation of our webinar series and to set the appropriate tone for 2023, we are pleased to welcome you to the 24th edition of our webinar series themed 2023 Economic Outlook, brought to you proudly by DCSL Academy. My name is Nike Taiwo. I head DCSL Academy team at DCSL, and we are honored to have you join us this morning. It promises to be worthwhile, and we do hope that the time that you will spend here today will be worth your while as well. To moderate the discourse this morning, we have our very own Managing Director, CEO, Ms. Bisi Adeyemi, to engage Mr. Koyemi Agbaje, who is the founder, CEO, RTC Advisory Services Limited, for a fireside chat on the 2023 economic outlook. Before I hand over proceedings to our moderator to begin the session, we'll quickly introduce some of our services for the benefit of all participants who are not familiar with our services or who are attending our event for the first time. So as part of our service offerings, before I go, we're DCSL Corporate Services Limited, we used to be a Deloitte entity. Our core competencies are in training services, governance, company secretarial and executive selection, as well as director recruitment services and DCSL law, which provides business advisory and legal services to various clients within the Nigeria economy and even outside Nigeria. We operate from our head office in Lagos with an operational branch in Abuja. Some of our services, like I mentioned, are shown on my screen. The DCSL Academy, which covers our training, executive selection, and director recruitment, company secretarial governance, and the DCSL law. Under the umbrella of the DCSL Academy, we provide training services such as directors, inductions, and onboarding. So if you have a new director on board and you would like for them to be properly inducted, so that you don't just throw them into the organization, the DCSL Academy is here to assist you to do that. We also provide open enrollment services and seminars, bespoke trainings for directors and senior management, director development programs, board retreats and strategy sessions, offshore trainings, industry and specialized trainings, as well as management and graduate training programs. To enable a seamless flow today, I'll quickly just mention a few of our ground rules. We urge you to rename your device appropriately. So my name is Nike Taiwo, and you can see from your end that my device is appropriately named. We also urge you to leave comments and contributions only in the chat box, and then Q&A in questions in the Q&A box to enable our moderator draw our facilitator's attention to your question. So I'll quickly just introduce the program flow and then introduce our moderator for today. So I'm currently doing the introduction, and thereafter, I would hand over to the moderator who would introduce the speaker, and then we'll quickly do a poll to set the tone for conversation. We'll have a fireside chat between the moderator and the facilitator for about 45 minutes, and then have a moderated Q&A for about 20 minutes, and then we'll take the final words from the facilitator and we will wrap up for the day. So our mandate is to spend 1 hour 30 minutes on the call. Please urge you to stay with us within the allotted time. So to quickly introduce the moderator, after which I'll hand over to her. Our moderator for today is our very own Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer. She's Mrs. Bisi Adeyemi. Her profile is on the screen. Just to mention that she's currently the President and Chairman of Council, Nigerian British Chamber of Commerce, and also Chairman Board of Trustees, Women in Business and Management and Public Service, the WIMBIS. She's an expert in residence at the Enterprise Development Center of the Pan-Atlantic University and served on the board, on the Executive Council on the Executive Council of WIMBIS before being appointed as the board chair last year. She also serves on the Executive Council of the Lagos Business School Alumni Association, and she's an independent non-executive director on the boards of Center for Women's Health and Information and Eventful Limited. She's passionate about corporate governance and facilitates board-level trainings on the subject. She's a resource person at the DCSL Academy and the Institute of Directors, and also anchors a weekly column on corporate governance in Business Day. I now hand over proceedings to our moderator to take over from here. Good morning, BA, and over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Nike, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me and that you can see me as well.
We can.
Okay, thank you, Nike, for the kind introduction. I'll just give some context to our conversation this morning. As we all know, several economies across the world have experienced a slowdown with inflation growing to higher than normal levels in the last couple of years. The cost of living crisis, tightening financial conditions in most regions, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the lingering COVID-19 pandemic all weigh heavily on the outlook. National economies are expected to grow at a slower pace in 2023. Global growth forecast is put at 3.2% in 2022, it was 3.2% in 2022, and it is now put at 2.7% in 2023. Obviously, this is the weakest that we have seen since 2001. In Nigeria, we're in a critical year as the national elections are expected to usher in new leadership that will determine the recovery growth trajectory of our country, which has been battling with multiple economic and social issues. The outcome of the elections will undoubtedly impact the economy. And it's in that regard that we think that individuals as well as corporates need to plan ahead to navigate the uncertainties that will shape businesses in 2023 and even beyond. So this seminar is designed to sort of review extensively the 2023 outlook, and we have no better person to do this for us than Mr. Okoyemi Agbaje. I mean, you probably all know him, but I'll just spend a few minutes to introduce him before we take a very quick vote to just set the tone for the webinar. So Mr. Okoyemi Agbaje is the founder of RTC Consulting Services, a leading strategy and business consulting firm in Lagos. Before RTC, he was senior lecturer at the Lagos Business School, and he has several years experience in the banking sector. He holds 2 master's degrees from the Lagos Business School, ISA, and also from the University of Lagos. He's a seasoned commentator on economy, politics, and strategy. Like I said, before before we engage in this chat with Okoyemi, we'll just quickly take a poll if the DCSL Academy team is ready for us. Nike, can we deploy the poll? Thank you very much. So there are 4 questions. I think the first one, of course, is asking us, how did our businesses fare in 2022? Did we do great, good, okay, not so bad, or very poorly? If we start voting now, and the second question is asking which of these factors affected your business the most in 2022? You can only choose one of the options just to give us a sense of what the generality of the participants think. So would it be foreign exchange rates and availability, insecurity, supply chain disruption caused by the Russia-Ukraine war, the aftermath of COVID-19 pandemic, price inflation, all of the above, or none of the above? And the third question is, do you think 2023 will have a better economic outlook compared to 2022? Yes, no, not sure. And the final question, to what extent will the outcome of the forthcoming elections impact the economic outlook for 2023? To a large extent, to a limited extent, not at all, I'm not sure. Please start voting so that we can see the results of the poll and then enter into the conversation. I'm not sure if I can see the results of the poll, but I hope you're all voting. Please do. We're going to stop the votes in 2 minutes. So 2 more minutes to vote. And then we'll stop so that we can proceed. One more minute to go. And I think we should stop the polls now so that we can just display the results of the poll. Thank you very much. So to the first question, how did your business fare in 2022? Okay, not so bad, has 43% of the votes. And great, I mean, that's interesting to see that on the whole, people didn't do too badly as far as 2022 is concerned. Second question, which of these factors affected your business, if any? Foreign exchange takes the cake, I think, at let's see, at 36% of the votes to be the highest. And the third question, trying to locate the third question. Do you think 2023 will have a better economic outlook compared to? Well, it's good to see that the majority of the audience is optimistic at 54%, and about half of that figure, 43%, are not so sure. And then finally, to what extent will the outcome of the forthcoming elections impact the economic outlook? 79%, majority of the audience believe that it will, to a large extent, impact the what 2023 would look like. Very interesting. So I'll bring Okwemi up now by asking him what his views on the poll results are. To start with, we can just start a conversation from there. Any surprises, or this is what you would have expected from an audience of this nature?
Well, I'm happy that everybody is optimistic. Most people are optimistic about 2023. I think they are correct to be optimistic. I'm also happy to note that they realize there's a strong political and policy impact on the outlook for 2023, which is real. It's a bit surprising, quite a large percentage say great for 2022, but that means that we have people who take their strategy and their business seriously on the poll.
Very seriously, absolutely.
Aligned with the poll.
Absolutely, and I agree with you that the optimism is encouraging. I mean, I'm optimistic as well. I sort of have a good feeling about 2023, but we'll see as it goes. So to start off with, I mean, can you give us, in your own view, the major highlights and the low points of the economy for 2022? What are the major highlights and what are the low points?
Yeah, on the positive side, the first positive I will refer to is also the first negative. So don't be surprised when I say the first positive, and you will see that it would also be the first. And that's the oil sector. Prices stayed up, generally around $90, $80 per barrel in 2022. That should have been a positive, and it is a positive irrespective of how Nigeria chooses to manage it. But because of the way that we've managed the economy, the oil subsidies that are becoming bigger and bigger, reaching reportedly around 7 trillion, oil thefts, underinvestment in the sector, poor the non-implementation of the PIB, all of that. Anyway, the bottom line is that the oil sector is our most significant positive and also our most significant negative. But let me go on with the positives then. Broader GDP growth, broader sectoral growth, recession is now a memory. And even though the growth is still low, but we've had some consistency to the improvements in growth, minus the oil sector in 2022. The end of COVID-19, I should mention that, that drag on global and domestic economy and social and society is off. There's some sectors that have been really positives: the technology, the ICT, information and communication, fintech, all that technology and related spaces have been a star in 2022 and will continue to do that. We're also happy about some infrastructure projects that appear to have improved, seen the light of day, or most close to seeing the light of day in 2022. The second Niger Bridge, the Lagos Blue Rail project, progress on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, the Lagos Deep Sea project. There's some traction regarding infrastructure. I may add the Ogun State Agro-Industrial Project, which is on, but again, it's a positive when that is completed. So those are, for me, the most significant positives. On the negative side, the list is longer. I've mentioned the oil sector. The global growth is declining. So there is the risk of a global recession, inflation globally, which also manifests domestically as a significantly high rate of inflation. Your poll respondents mentioned the exchange rate, currency situation, a significant negative, and the arbitrage gap between the CBN rate and the parallel markets. The whole continuation of underinvestment, both foreign direct investment and portfolio investment in the Nigerian economy. The social sector, people are suffering. Poverty at 63%, unemployment over 33%, insecurity, all of that, the emigration of our young professionals, all of that suggests that there's some form of social crisis. And then policy, I think, remains suboptimal in many respects. So, and I suspect part of the optimism is because most people anticipate a change in policy with a prospective change in government. Finally, I think, well, not finally, the electricity reforms are stalled. It's a negative. And then the Ukraine-Russia war, which has been a global driver of inflation and food and commodity price increases, and energy
and supply chain disruptions as well.
Yeah, supply chains.
All right, thank you. I'll just take you up on a few. I have a few follow-up questions in the positives. So you had mentioned, well, that the oil sector, which could have been a positive, ended up being a negative, given all of the things I had said. What would have, enabled us? What should we have done differently? What should the government have done differently to ensure that we actually took advantage of oil price increase?
Okay, so first of all is the issue of, well, the most obvious challenge is the non-deregulation of the downstream petroleum sector, which is now an illegality. As we all know, we enacted and the president signed the Petroleum Industry Bill, which mandates deregulation of the sector. So the failure to deregulate the sector is now untenable, but not just because of it as a legal issue, because of the dysfunctionalities it introduces in a downstream petroleum sector. So there's no investment. The investment that we should have in the downstream and the midstream and all the infrastructure and investments around the downstream petroleum sector is absent. There's one or two people who have the guts to deploy significant resources in an underegulated market, and that has been Dangote. So it's not a coincidence that that's the only person that is investing. Many other people may not be confident to make those level of investment. Of course, the whole management of the sector, the whole story of oil theft, and the fact that we've not made our downstream sector and even the upstream attractive to investors, and therefore we see the international oil companies exiting and selling off their assets and all of that. So that has to change. We have to have a more investment-friendly environment for the sector, and we have to deregulate the downstream.
The other one was COVID-19. So you said, well, positive in the sense that, well, it seems to have gone away. But however, recent information reaching us from China would suggest that it's back again, and government is saying we're not going to ban flights from China. What are your thoughts in this regard? Are we being penny wise, pound foolish, or are we, just trying to bury our head in the sand?
I support. I actually am in support of a very benign, a more liberal attitude towards COVID-19. It is debatable, in my view, if the costs that we incurred and the whole world incurred through lockdowns and restrictions and many of those measures, if the cost, you see, the life is about costs and benefits, risks and advantages, all of balancing the situation. So while COVID was clearly a problem, it is possible that we overreacted in terms of the economic policy responses to it. The medical responses to it, of course, we can continue taking medical actions. But in terms of the economic impact of some of the measures, is debatable. But certainly for now, given the scale of the COVID, I would not think that we need. Yes, we need to invest in the medical side of things. We need to continue to do the testing. We need to stay on top of the variants. We need to be sure that if there's a place where COVID comes from, we segregate that place and we take action. And so there can be a valid debate about what to do with China. We can't, once we're sure of the scale of the issue, but I would want us to be a little bit careful that we don't embark on a series of measures that will
shutdowns and lockdowns. Certainly no more shutdowns or lockdowns. Okay, thank you. We'll leave COVID for a bit because I think that can get a bit controversial. So what trends do you foresee will impact corporate strategy in 2023? So organizations are now beginning to look at their strategy, either reviewing them or crafting new ones for the year and the years to come. What key items would you have them look at that will impact their strategy one way or the other?
The first thing, and that's obvious from some of the things we've said earlier, the first thing is the prospect of political, but more importantly, of policy change. It's inevitable almost that policies must change. I think businesses have to be proactive in anticipating those, because these policies are going to have significant impact on the economy, some positive, some negative. So for instance, I've spoken about deregulation, which means removal of fuel subsidies, which means, at least in the short term, an increase in the prices of PMS and some associated petroleum products. That can increase logistics expenses for businesses and all of that. I think that
cost
on the positive
side,
of course, cost, yes. And on the positive side, it can increase investment opportunities for firms and firms involved in the sector and its entire value chain and all of those who serve those entities. Policy changes in respect to exchange rates, we may also have to anticipate that. I think it is clear that we have to take some action in relation to the harmonization of this dual exchange rate system, which is corrupt, which is a disincentive to investment, which is one of the significant barriers to foreign direct investment, and even perhaps portfolio investment in the economy. So you're going to have to anticipate, I think businesses should have to anticipate that. And therefore, we may begin to anticipate some positive changes in terms of investments and markets. The other trends I want to focus on is, of course, technology. Businesses from the COVID era, but even before that, will have to develop a very clear technology strategy. If you're a financial institution, you have to have a fintech strategy. If you're DCSL, you have to have a technology strategy with which you are delivering webinars and all of that. So the investments will accelerate as economic growth begins to resume, and the level of investments required in technology, artificial intelligence, communication networks, and all of those things will increase. E-commerce strategies, e-commerce platforms, and all of that. So technology and policy, those will be my top two trends to focus on. But the other thing is that I suspect that I would suggest that firms should begin to adopt a pro-growth posture. So we've had 8 or 9 years of very low economic growth or recessions. I suspect that may change. So the firm that things are not growing and adopts a conservative posture and is not prepared for market growth may find that growth will resume and it may be caught napping. So for me, I would suggest that firms expect and plan for economic growth.
Plan for growth. Okay. I just want to stay on foreign exchange for a bit. So you mentioned policies that will drive harmonization. There have been concerns about harmonization and the correlation to devaluation of the currency. What kind of policies should one expect as far as harmonizing the exchange rates? If you're just going to give your own suggestion as to how do we actually achieve a fair rate, whatever that is, or a true exchange rate.
I think the bad news, the good news is that if we harmonize our exchange rates, we're likely to attract more investments. It is likely to be a positive market signal, and the economic community globally and domestically will realize that reforms are back on the table, and it will boost investor confidence. The bad news is that the harmonization, at least in the short term, can only go in one direction. And that means the word that you've used, devaluation. So there's likely to be some unavoidable degree of devaluation of the currency. We're going to have, we have about 450 at the official market, and we have about 740, 745, 750 in the black parallel markets. And most people are trading at 740s. I suspect that we're going to have some move on the official from that 450 closer to 700, but I mean closer to the black market. But certainly, I don't expect us to catch up with that, and I don't think it is necessarily desirable that we do so. But we have to signal to the markets that we are ready to adopt a more market-friendly exchange, somewhere in the region of 600 perhaps. and then begin so that we can begin to have more investment, a more natural economic dynamic, and therefore over time, we may then be able to achieve that harmonization. I suspect the harmonization will be, the full harmonization will be achieved in the medium term rather than in the short term, but there has to be significant movement in the direction of devaluing the now largely untenable and mostly corrupt official.
Okay, so at some point, I mean, there'll be a convergence, where would have perhaps a single rate, hopefully, but that perhaps might be the long term or in the longer term. Okay,
I hope it is in the medium term rather than in the longer term. But yeah, in the 1 year, 2 years, we should hope to achieve convergence.
Yes, thank you. The elephant in the room, the elections, and I'm going to take you up on, I don't want to make predictions, but, we have 3 frontliners, not to do an analysis, but sort of, people have said we can't really see any significant differences in ideology, in manifesto, but do you see anything different? Sort of like to do like an analysis of the main candidates. Are there differences in what they are? Perspective,
from the economic and the policy direction. Let me make one admission. I'm very calm about this election, and the reason is that all those 3 frontliners, we do mostly the same things. Their policy postures are similar. The imperatives before the country and its economy are clear. You have to deal with those 2 things I mentioned earlier: the subsidies, the exchange rates, security, and resume economic growth. And whether you are Bola Tinubu or Atiku Abubakar or Peter Obi, one of whom, all things being equal, may become the next president, you have to have sensible policies to deal with those. And they all 3 have spoken in more or less the same vein about those things. I will remove the subsidy. I will harmonize the exchange rates. I will deal with tackle insecurity. And I will deal with economic growth and resume investment and all of that. So apart from the politics and the preferences about individuals, in terms of policies, the outcomes are likely to be similar. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
There will be individual differences in terms of tenor, speed, effectiveness, and all of that. But I think that we should look forward to more or less the similar policy outcome.
Okay, I want to narrow down on subsidy removal. It's been a thorn in the flesh that will not go away. So various governments have come and gone to say that we'll remove subsidy, but they never really have the political will to do so. What are the implications, on the policy, on the citizenry? Poverty index is at an all-time high. How will removal of subsidy impact the regular man? I don't want to say the common man, but because we are all common men now, as it were, how would subsidy removal impact everyone?
Quite frankly, I always believed I'm very sensitive to the social sector, and I suspect more than the average economist, I focus on the social sector. But I think we have overdone this fear that subsidy removal will kill everybody with poverty and will destroy the poor people. And we've been saying this for 2 decades. And the poor people are getting poorer.
Yeah.
Perhaps we have to reevaluate our paradigms about subsidy removal. I wouldn't even focus on it as subsidy removal. I think what we need to focus on is the cost-benefit analysis. What is the opportunity cost of these subsidies? I suspect that if we did that analysis, we will find that 1, maintaining a subsidized downstream petroleum sector denies us of a vibrant domestic downstream. And Nigeria has the capacity, in my view, to have 10 large refineries, to export refined petroleum products, and therefore to employ hundreds of thousands of young men and women, engineers, technicians, all of that in that sector. The value chain for the industry is large, but remains underdeveloped because we insist on not building the industry. And what we actually do with our subsidies is to maintain the industries of other countries from which we are importing these products. So for me, the choice is easy. Now, what we need, the subsidy removal anyway, is a one-time adjustment. If you deregulate the sector, and then you make the adjustments in terms of price, and then you begin to build the industry, I would argue that the benefits far outweigh the cost. Moreover, the subsidy regime, as we've seen over the years, has become such a corrupt drain pipe that produce the kind of dysfunctionalities that we now talk about. Oil prices are high, but Nigeria does not have additional revenues. So for me, I think it's an easy decision. Unfortunately, we lost the opportunity, and I blame governments for that, not our people. We lost the opportunity several times when oil prices were very low. Those were the times we should have deregulated the sector. Because if we deregulated at the time of very low oil prices, as we have had 2 or 3 opportunities in the last decade, we would not be politically expensive. It would and socially debilitating. We will not have the concerns. When you deregulate and prices are low, people will see that petrol prices can come down. But we've lost those opportunities, and I think bureaucrats have taken us for a ride, using the poor people as the bogeyman, and they have sustained the corruption that they benefit from. So for me, it's an easy decision. We should deregulate. We should do real deregulation, not subsidy removal, not price raising, not price adjustment, real deregulation of the sector, so that we can have the investments that we need.
And allow market forces to determine.
And have the investments and have the jobs that the sector can produce.
Absolutely. Thank you. I would just like to remind our audience that your questions should be put in the Q&A box, so that we can see them and not in the chat box. So I want to ask your thoughts on the Dangote refinery. How does this change the mix, if at all, from the perspective of deregulation and removal of subsidy? Does it have any impact, or would it, when eventually comes on stream, have any impact?
Well, it's first of all, the Dangote refinery is a good thing. We must commend the investor who has taken significant risks, and the financiers who have also taken significant risks. Like I said, it's not easy to take those kind of risks in a market that is not yet deregulated. It's not everybody that imagines they have the political clout to survive trading in an regulated government market. But evidently, Alhaji Dangote believes he does, he can deal with that. So for now, Dangote refinery of itself does not give us a deregulated market. Government has to take a position. So for instance, if what I imagine would happen if government does not deregulate and Dangote refinery produces PMS, is that it would have to sell it to the government, and then government applies that subsidy and sells it to us at a subsidized price, which is the continuation of the lack of subsidy. Which in my view is probably not transparent and is probably not ideal for the market. My preference and what should be the policy preference of all reasonable Nigerians should be that we should deregulate the sector. Alhaji Dangote and all other producers should sell their products to the industry chain and ultimately to end users. And if they want to export, they should export and earn foreign currency for Nigeria. And in the end, everybody will be better off. But I think it's a net positive to the extent that it's locally produced, it produces local jobs. The people employed there will be employed in the Nigerian economy, and some logistic costs, because there will be marginal benefits in terms of the logistic costs of importing from Singapore or Malaysia or Cote d'Ivoire, rather than from Lekki Free Trade Zone. So I don't discount the advantages of Dangote refinery, but I say that the ideal destination should be deregulation, with which Dangote refinery will be a powerful participant, being a local producer and being a large producer as well.
Should we be concerned or suspicious of the fact that government is also now an investor in the refinery? I mean, does that portend anything, or we should just take it on the face value?
Especially if it's a regulated market, we should be concerned, because that means government regulates the market, is a shareholder in a major player, derives direct and indirect benefits from that, and then the bureaucrats who manage government's stake in the Dangote refinery will then have their own interests and objectives. So for me, the objective, the preference that Nigerians should have in terms of transparency, and that Alhaji Aliko Dangote and the company itself would probably have, is that you deregulate the sector and allow. But if, for instance, there are other attempts to build new refineries, and you have a monopolistic market, do you expect the promoters of the new refineries to feel comfortable in a regulated environment that their competitor also has the benefit of government being a major shareholder?
But right now, I guess they are minority shareholders.
Yeah, I think they bought 20% or something.
Yeah, so they're not majority.
Yeah, they're not majority, but they're significant.
But significant stakeholders, absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, let's shift a little to security issues. Towards the end of 2022, we witnessed a lot of police brutality, and there were speculations that perhaps people are gearing up for an EndSARS 2.0. What's your take on this?
It's a risk. And the risk of EndSARS 2.0 has always been there. As a matter of fact, our analysis on the political side suggests that the EndSARS movement attempted, and possibly some elements of it, morphed into the obedient movement, for instance. So that disgruntlement remains there. And the thankfully, government response with the case of the lawyer, Mrs. Rahim also, was proactive a bit, and so that prevented the worst possible outcomes. But I suspect that any new government that does not aggressively embrace security and policing reforms will be inviting a second and possibly a worse episode of the EndSARS required. The imperative for security and policing reforms, not just in terms of policing and the citizen, but in terms of the quality and effectiveness of security and policing, is a major imperative. Security is one of the biggest challenges of the Nigerian economy. So I expect that, and yes, I do concur that there's a significant risk that if we don't reform the police, if we don't make policing more effective, we face not just threats of a EndSARS 2.0, but more significant threats to the integrity of our country and the peace and stability of our country. Remember that in 2022, one of the developments was that the terrorists and insurgents actually threatened Abuja. And that backfired. That worked to the favor of innocent citizens of Nigeria, because it compelled government, it got the international community involved, because their embassies are all in Abuja, and then the issue will become an issue of states and all of that. And so it internationalized, they are threat to Abuja internationalize the problem and compel the government of Nigeria to be more aggressive in response. I suspect that that response has been more effective since then, but there's still significant gaps to cover in terms of security.
Thank you, Quinn. It'd be good to know what your views are on state policing. I mean, it's been a thorny issue over the years with some governors advocating, for them to be able to handle the security of their states. What are your views on state police?
I'm an unapologetic supporter of state police. I completely support the person. Remember my background. I sat on the board of the Lagos State Security Trust Fund as a representative of citizens, not as a representative of government, as a representative of the public for 8 years. And I sat for 2 years as executive secretary of the State Security Trust Fund. And both of those institutions were created to fund the police and security because of the shortfalls in funding from the federal police. And the logic of it is unsustainable, that states will then have to create funding mechanisms and funding systems to fund an ineffective and suboptimal federal policing. I think we cannot defend that any longer. It will be one of the imperatives that I believe civil society will place before any new president of Nigeria that takes over from Muhammadu Buhari, that he would have to facilitate the post-creation of state policing for any state that wants. And for those who don't want, they're perfectly entitled to continue. But it is, from a legal point of view, we both have backgrounds in law. From a legal point of view, the fact that states have crimes that they've created on their statute books, and they don't have a mechanism for enforcing those crimes, defeats the very notion of criminal law and of law as something that is accompanied with sanction. And therefore, the dysfunctionality we're seeing in terms of policing, security, and all of that is not a coincidence. It's a predictable outcome of the structure and systems we've adopted for policing in Nigeria.
Again, just to play the devil's advocate, some people have argued that if you have state police, then you'll have a situation where the governors will just hijack this as their own personal security and use those, particularly during elections, to.
It's a valid concern, and I've seen proposals, sensible, adequate proposals in my view, that you don't have to create state policing in a legal vacuum. You might create it with prescriptions, constitutional prescriptions and structures for trying to create some checks and balances on the process. The second point, of course, as one governor, a favorite governor of mine in those days argued, isn't the federal police being abused for elections and as a political police? Haven't we seen presidents deploy policing? Haven't we seen the whole infrastructure of our elections are done? Is it not, is the police and the state security service not a critical part of the infrastructure by which what word will I use? You secure your victory in an election.
Yeah.
So it's a hypocritical concern, but yes, we have to address it, and so we can create systems through the constitution itself when we have
to check abuse,
to allow create checks and balances.
Okay.
To ensure
Thank you.
That, yeah.
There are no abuses. Okay. So I cannot leave you without asking about the Japa syndrome, as it were. We have seen mass exodus of young and not so young people, people selling their property to relocate to, different parts of the world, professionals, and lately even non-professionals, So what are your thoughts as far as the implications on Nigeria itself and on Nigerian businesses? And is this, does this forebode well for us ultimately, some people are trying to say there are positives to it. Ultimately, there are remittances that will come in and all of that. But what are your thoughts?
Okay. First of all, I suspect that JAPA will continue irrespective of the transition of 2023. I suspect it will continue into the medium term, at least, and will only begin to abate when the impacts of policy improvements and economic improvements and social improvements in Nigeria begin to manifest, which may be in the medium term. So sadly, one reality is that anybody who is currently thinking of JAPA will not say, we have a new president who's going to change Nigeria. Because it took people a process. It took some people 5 years to arrive at the decision to leave. And maybe 8 years for most people, because we've had, like I said, 8 years of lack of economic growth, a decline in economic opportunity, an increase in poverty, an increase in unemployment. So there's not going to be a radical reduction or abatement of immigration simply because we've done a transition. But I think that if we begin to do the right things, immediately new governments come into play and we begin to increase economic opportunity, reduce poverty, take actions, create a more investment-friendly environment, resume investment, create jobs, then the process will begin to slow down. And then, just like we saw when the Obasanjo reforms began to manifest and Nigeria began to be a good investment destination, many of our people returned. So it can happen. Yeah. And there are the people living now are the ages at which they will, in 20 years' time, will begin to think of coming back. Are there benefits and disadvantages? Absolutely. We don't lose by having a strong, educated, professional Nigerian diaspora in the Western world, in those economies. One day there could be access to Nigeria. For me, I believe that in the short term, it's a negative because those skills are needed at home. The medical skills we're losing, the technical, financial, accounting, legal skills, all of those professionals who are leaving, those skills may be more better needed in Nigeria, but because of the absence of opportunity, they've chosen to seek opportunity elsewhere. But in the end, there will be benefits from it. The example that everybody cites, which is a valid example, is the Indian diaspora that left India because of the absence of economic, and they're now an asset to that country. So I'm not weeping over it. I am urging our policymakers to reform policy and provide economic opportunity for our people at home.
To encourage them to stay. Okay, thank you. So finally from me, before I throw it open to the audience, obviously when the new government comes in, there'll be a few low-hanging fruits, as far as policy is concerned. What in your view will be this? Are there immediate policy decisions or pronouncements you want them to make that can have very far-reaching implications and sort of help to ameliorate some of the issues we're dealing with now? What would this be?
I think I've already spoken about some of this. They are going to be painful, but I would urge us all to finally understand that when you take, we cannot have a good economy with dual exchange rates, and we cannot have investments with such a wide disparity in exchange rates, 250 naira, 300 naira, and then you expect somebody to come and invest. So we'll have the low-hanging fruit. We have to move towards harmonizing. I do not mandate that we must combine it to 700 or 740 on the same day, but there has to be
or reduce it to 450.
Yes, exactly. So we have to make a significant move towards exchange rate harmonization, and we have to eliminate the fuel subsidies and have a sensible, even the fiscal implications of the fuel subsidies is no longer sustainable. When I was talking about the low points of 20 2022. I didn't mention the fiscal risk, the high fiscal risk Nigeria is now taking, with low revenues, with high payouts for subsidy and operating and salaries and overheads and all of that, and with a high debt service obligation, and then with even the budget itself having to be funded almost 50% through borrowings or more. So we are now in an unsustainable fiscal situation. So we have to deal with the exchanges and we have to deal with the subsidies. Those are two immediate, more or less. And as a matter of fact, my ideal would be if President Buhari could, or government could be persuaded to deal with those two after the election.
He has said he will, but let's see whether he has the...
So then we now have to signal to the world that the era of economic policy by borrowing as an exclusive economic strategy has ended, and that we want to move towards an investment and markets-led approach to. So that's about economic policy posturing and signals to the markets and signals to our partners and signals to the investment community, both domestic and internationally. My suspicion is that we have to do something about the central bank. I'm a bit embarrassed at what has become of our central bank. Is now an agency that hires people to protest, and the central bank governor is accused of terrorism, and then it's just so the institution is now so engaged in things that is our central bank should never be engaged in. It is totally so derailed from its a very professional institution. And I suspect that if we don't do something about it, the world may continue not to take us seriously. And finally, fiscal reforms. So we have this issue of ways and means that is outstanding, that has to be regulated. We have debts overhang and we're funding the... So we have to think through our fiscal situation and have a more rational fiscal strategy. And I suspect all of these are emergency actions that must begin to happen within the first weeks or months latest of the new
government. Thank you. Thank you very much, Okoyemi. We have a few questions in the Q&A. We'll just quickly go to them now. I think the first one you've answered, but I'll read it out of the same. Is the petroleum subsidy even legal now, given the PIB?
Well, this petroleum subsidies, given that the PIB, which is a law passed by the National Assembly and signed by the president, mandates that it regulated petroleum sector. So it's illegal. It's an illegality.
So, I mean, somebody can get up and take the president to court to enforce the law. Well, if it's criminal, then it's not just taking him to court, he has immunity. Second question, is the topic of subsidy not a reflection of the inefficiencies and fraud in the oil and gas sector? Should the prior topic not be about fraud and inefficiencies on the public sector side of the industry? So I guess it's asking that.
Go ahead. Sorry, go. Okay. I agree. I mean, it's clear that you see, when we now say that the subsidy has become 7 trillion naira, and then when we look at the volumes that have purportedly gone up of the consumption of petroleum in Nigeria during recessionary and low growth periods, you know that there's something going wrong with the subsidy. Yeah. You know that there's an element of inefficiency, fraud, corruption, and of course smuggling. We're probably, I mean, we're definitely selling petrol, we're leveraging subsidies domestically for parts of the West African market. So yes, there's inefficiency and there's fraud and there's criminality, corruption in the sector. But it's not an either or. We have to, and I suspect the best way to deal with that fraud and inefficiency is to wipe out the subsidy. In any event, the subsidy is the deregulation of the sector is a net benefit in itself, whether or not there was fraud or inefficiency. Even if the subsidy regime was being scrupulously applied and there was not a penny missing, we would still need to deregulate our downstream petroleum sector so that we can have the investments and the jobs and the economic growth that comes from it. So I don't agree that we should first discuss the prior topic before discussing the second topic. I think we can deal with both.
Both, absolutely. I mean, and once you remove the subsidy anyway, the issue of inefficiencies will not occur. Third question, is there a possibility of seeing the exchange rates at the different markets converging this year?
Well, I would not say it is impossible. I would say it's unlikely, in my view. I don't think I don't expect that we would have a short-term convergence of the exchange rate. I think that because what needs to happen? You need to signal to markets that we want to deal with this dual exchange rate, and you have to make a significant move in that direction. The market has to believe you and then respond. Now, how do they respond? They respond by investing in that economy. Those investments by themselves improve your exchange rate management abilities because they send in alternative complementary inflows of dollars. I recall that during a period when we were doing aggressive economic reforms under Obasanjo in the second term, and when we had Soludo in the central bank, and when we had very strong economic reforms, and we got the Paris Club debt write-off and all of those, we began, the government, the central bank and the government for long periods of time stopped funding the FX market because of the complementary inflows of foreign currency to investments and remittances and all those other sources. So I don't think all of those action and reaction and the confidence and all of that can happen in the short term. That's why I see it more in a medium term, and I'll be happy for it to happen in a year or two, quite frankly.
Thank you. We have another question. What sector of the economy should be given the most attention and priority in 2023?
Well, it depends on what angle you're looking at. If you're looking from the government side of view as a policy action, or if you're looking from the private sector as an investment option. If it's government, I would say that because of the impact insecurity is having on agriculture and the declining agricultural production and the risk of food insecurity, government should focus on improving agricultural output. Of course, it doesn't need to go and become farmers. All it needs to do is improve security in the country. But from the private sector point of view, I've said I'm excited about what's happening in the technology space, the fintech space, the ICT space, the financial sector. I noticed in Q3, the latest Q3 data available, that there was a dip in manufacturing, which can be a warning if we don't restore growth. It can be a warning of things happening to consumption because of inflation, because of exchange rates, because of supply chains, and all of that. So the private sector may want to pay attention to manufacturing output, but of course, government needs complementary action, because I believe that contraction we saw in manufacturing in Q3 was probably due to the things that are happening with exchange rates, inflation, consumer purchasing power.
Thank you. What do you think would be the impact of the rising debt burden on the economy, considering the narrowing revenues and growing competing demands? I think you already mentioned, but can you just...
I will add that we need a lot, like I said, we need fiscal reforms. I'm not scared. Let me make that clear. I think that the Nigerian economy has the capacity if we had very creative and very effective economic management, we can easily restructure our finances. We're now having conversations about securitizing the ways and means outstanding. If the original sin of economic policy in Nigeria in the last 8 years has been that we have not been attractive for investment. So we have had to rely on, and then oil prices were then, because we were not attractive for investment, oil prices were low, we insisted on paying subsidies. So we just put ourselves in a bind that nobody imposed on us. So we can easily untangle all of those things. For instance, if you just cancel the subsidies, you've released 6 trillion, 7 trillion into the budget. And you have dealt with a significant part of what you are borrowing to finance. You are borrowing to supply petrol to your citizens. So for me, many of the things, you also need some level of public sector restructuring. There are also issues. We need to look at that again. Does the public sector make sense? Do the agencies make sense? Is there a coherence, a synthesis to the agencies that exist? And that work has been done. I suspect somebody will have to
implement it.
Implement that work. So I don't think, I'm not scared. I think the original sin, I've spoken about it, and the original solution is really competent and dynamic economic management. And I'm convinced that any of the three frontliners in terms of economic policy should be able to produce that.
Thank you very much. Nigeria as it is today is a consumer nation. How could the country get back to the good old days when we're producing what we consume and also export finished products to earn foreign exchange?
It's about economic incentives. How an economy performs is usually a function of the incentives that we have established for economic participants. If we change the incentive structure, the people will change their behavior. So, for instance, the current incentive is if is for me to find a way to get dollar at 450 naira so that I can make a large margin on it. That's the incentive structure the economy offers. And if I succeed in getting dollar at 450, and then I become a millionaire. If I can get $1 million at 450, I'm a millionaire immediately. And if I can get it every week, wow.
We'll be a millionaire anytime.
Yeah, so those are the incentives we offer. We have to rationalize the incentive structure in the economy. And that's why this issue of harmonization is important. There are other important things, but when we create an economy that rewards productivity, that rewards production, that rewards hard work and diligence, and that is why we need structural economic reforms. That's why we need government to make sense. That's why we need the budgets of the country to be rational. The budgets of the country cannot be spent paying the salaries of civil servants and servicing debts. And then we are now looking frantically for money to complete Lagos-Ibadan Expressway and second Niger. And we then takes us 8 years or 10 years to do those things. So my answer to the question is that we can do that. I don't doubt that we have the ability to do it, but we now need a process of rational structural economic reforms. Those reforms that have been effectively, by and large, suspended, and the ones that were not suspended that we enacted into the law, such as PIB, were not implemented. Once we do that, I think our markets will respond and our people will respond.
Absolutely, thank you. With the recent supplementary budget for 2022 signed by Mr. President and the extension of the lifespan of the 2022 budget to March 2023, is there any business sense for companies to benchmark their 2023 budgets against the FGM 2023 budget?
I didn't get the very last part of that, but I get the question. So we're going to have, we now have essentially.
Should they be benchmarking? Should they be benchmarking 2023 budget or the 2022 budget?
The 2022 budget is been extended to March. So essentially, the implementation of it. So it's not new. Under Obasanjo, and I think even Jonathan, they used to always extend the budgets, and it was getting ridiculous in which budgets were even extended to June or so. I think that we should not be distracted by it. The essence of that is to enable them have legal cover for continuing to spend the appropriations enacted in 2022. But the dominant assumptions for economic planning in 2023 will be those designed in the 2023 budget, with all of their problems, such as the very high deficit portion of it, the signal that subsidies may go because it's budgeted only till May, the imperative of dealing with the ways and means that is in the system, the imperative of dealing with the borrowing requirements of government to keep itself sustainable, and all of that. So I wouldn't suggest you should be distracted by the extension of the 2022 budget to March or the supplementary budget. I think those were just mechanisms to allow 22
to finish spending the money. I said to allow them to finish spending the monies that they had budgeted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I have another question. I think we can only take two more questions. With the drive of government to improve revenue from the non-oil sector, increase tax and all of that, do you envisage inflation rate will slow down even if subsidies removed? In other words, where do you see inflation going?
Okay, so for the tax question, sadly, yes. As government seeks to restructure, I mentioned that we need a whole new fiscal reform. I'm sure that any new government will begin to look at what are the new taxes. Is this VAT rate adequate? Or how can we improve collection even if we don't improve, even if we don't increase the rate? Remember, one of them has experience with ramping up revenues through more effective tax collection from Lagos. Yeah. So you can expect, at the very least, more effective tax collection on a national scale, and possibly an increase in the VAT rate and other things to
another increase.
But in terms of the inflation rate, we envisage 2 years of inflation this year, next year, because many of the policies we have spoken about for next year, they will be inflationary. So the subsidies, exchange rates. So you can assume that even though it may not rise, because even though the rate may not rise to the levels, may begin to decline or so, maybe in the second half of the year after we have absorbed the policy impact of any increases. But you should assume that 2023 will also be inflationary.
Okay, so I'll take one more question. Any quick win for the new government in terms of stimulating employment?
Well, in terms of stimulating employment, the quick wins usually will be things like public works projects, infrastructure, providing support for agricultural investment by younger people. The infrastructure for many of these things are in place. And I believe that all of the contestants have understood, have spoken about the imperative of stimulating employment, but I would imagine that the areas to focus on are public works, infrastructure, agriculture, empowerment scheme, technology. which can also provide solar power, things like that, which many of which the ideas are already on the table. It just needs somebody to drive implementation and effectiveness.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Okoyemi. I mean, I'm very excited that, you know, we started on an optimistic note and we are ending on sort of an optimistic note. I mean, there have been concerns, you know, that what will 2023 hold? But I think even from the polls, you know, we can see that we all are optimistic. So, but I would like your final words. What final words would you like to leave our audience with? As we
I will, my final words, it allies with all I've said. I think our people should, yes, do the politics, ensure you vote, support your candidate, but focus on the policies, focus on the economy. Don't get distracted by the politics. In the end, like I said, I'm positive about, I like the choices we are making. In terms of, we're not making a choice between somebody who is going to continue state control of the economy, somebody who is going to continue borrowing, somebody who is going to refuse to promote investment and markets, and will try to control exchange rates, control everything, prices, control subsidies. So we're making the choice between three people who essentially have the same policy posture, even though they pretend to have disagreements. But the bottom line is that the policy should improve. The outlook for economic activity is positive. Growth should resume, and we should not challenge ourselves to even get growth to the levels of 7 to 10% GDP growth per annum. And I think it is possible by 2024, 2025.
7%, you said?
Yes. Sorry?
Did you say 7% GDP growth?
7 to 10%. Yeah, that should be the target for Nigeria if we want to affect poverty and unemployment and improve infrastructure. So I'm positive, and I encourage all our participants to be positive.
To be so. Okay. Thank you very much, Okoyemi, and thank you to our participants. I will just leave you with Okoyemi's final words. Do the politics. Please vote. If you haven't collected your PVC, go and collect it. But do focus on the policies, you know, as much as possible. Thank you very much for your time here. I will hand you back to Nike to round off. Nike, over to you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much, BA. Thank you very much, Mr. Agbaje, once again, for always answering us every time that we call. We thank you for your time, and we do not take your time and your support for granted. A note to also thank all our participants once again. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for paying attention, and would also just urge you that in case you've missed one or two things because of your network connectivity, a link has been dropped in the chat box that has that leads you to YouTube. Please feel free to refer to the conversations that we've had so far today. For all our social, for our future events, our future trainings for 2023, and to also request for a copy of our 2023 training calendar, please feel free to send us an email via dcsl@dcsl.com.ng. Also, please feel free to visit any of our social media platforms for our ongoing trainings. Once we finalize the training materials, we put all of that on our platforms. On Instagram, YouTube, and on Twitter, we are DCSL Nigeria, and on LinkedIn, we are DCSL Corporate Services Limited. Please follow us so that you don't miss out on any of our trainings or any information that we know that you will find very useful. We thank you very much once again. We look forward to welcoming you at our future events and wish you a very productive and prosperous 2023 in perfect health and all-round abundance. Thank you very much. It's a wrap from our end, but before we sign out, we just dropped a poll, a link to a feedback in the chat box, and would please urge you to give us your feedback on how we did. For us at DCSL, feedback is very important to us. We want to be able to do this better. We want to be able to be able to improve the next time that we're doing this. So we urge you that before signing out, kindly just click the link and give us your feedback on how we did. And it's a wrap from our end. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you once again. Bye-bye.